Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. After 24 hours of will she, won't she, the Deputy First Minister confirmed she won't be attending the inauguration of the new President of Ireland. Instead of heading south to Dublin, Emma Little Pengelly will be in London taking part in a remembrance event at Windsor Castle. We'll assess what that decision might mean for already tense relations at Stormont. One public pay deal has landed, another could be about to, but are we mortgaging our future to make sure people get a fair wage today? And has the Alliance Party come up with a workable plan to solve the difficult issue of memorials and monuments to those involved in the Troubles? After days of speculation towards the end of last week, at least we now know the Deputy First Minister won't be there to witness the inauguration of Ireland's 10th President on Tuesday. Her predecessor, Peter Robinson, did attend the swearing-in of President Michael D. Higgins in 2011 in his official capacity as First Minister, but Emma Little Pengelly has a diary clash that means she'll be in Windsor in England rather than the Irish capital in 2 days' time. Our political correspondent, Gareth Gordon, has the details.
When President Higgins was inaugurated in 2011, the then DUP First Minister Peter Robinson was there, alongside the Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness. Stormont was suspended for the next inauguration 7 years later, so the issue did not arise. Of course, during his second term, President Higgins angered Unionists by refusing to go to a church service marking the centenary of Northern Ireland in Armagh. Her successor, Catherine Connolly, elected with the support of Sinn Féin and others from the left, will be inaugurated on Tuesday. But after much speculation about the DUP Deputy First Minister Emma Little Pengelly, we now know she will not be there. In a statement, she says it will not be possible for her to attend because of a number of other commitments in Belfast and Windsor. She says she is due to attend an act of remembrance at Stormont in the morning before travelling to Windsor Castle for a special reception to mark the 80th anniversary of Victory in Japan Day. She concludes by wishing Catherine Connolly well as she takes up office and says she hopes to speak to her personally in the coming days. The Justice Minister was asked if the Deputy First Minister should attend the inauguration in Dublin.
No one is going to suggest that Emma is suddenly a nationalist because she goes to the inauguration of the Irish president. It's a courtesy and it's a generosity that shows leadership. And I would personally think it would be good if she could go. But again, I think that's a debate that we can have in a measured and temperate way.
We'll soon know if this statement from the Deputy First Minister has diffused what was threatening to be another potentially damaging row at Stormont.
Gareth Gordon reporting there. Let's speak to the commentator Mark Devonport about that development. Welcome to the programme, Mark. Were you surprised when you heard that the Deputy First Minister isn't going to attend Tuesday's inauguration?
Well, I wasn't surprised when I looked at the date, November the 11th, and of course that has been the date of past inaugurations, but it's clearly also an important date in the Unionist calendar, and she does have genuine engagements in both Stormont and Windsor. At the same time, there was no reference whatsoever in that statement to maybe sending the junior minister, the DUP's Joanne Bunting, or some other representative of the party. So you've got to wonder whether this is actually part of, I suppose, a bit of a hardening of the DUP position as they look towards the next Assembly election, which is now about 18 months away.
Yeah, because there would be a fairly lengthy list of individuals who could stand in for Emma Little Pengelly. There's a DUP junior minister, there are other full ministers in the executive. You would think that if the party wanted to be represented, somebody could be found. Yeah,
you would think so. And as we're speaking at the moment, it's a bit unclear. But the fact that there wasn't any reference in that statement will make you think that maybe they're going to give that a miss. That said, she does have another engagement in her diary, and it was a pretty polite refusal. It wasn't curt, it wasn't a snub. She was looking forward to conversations in the future, and you imagine that those will happen.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that bit was tagged on at the end. That was a reference specifically to looking forward to speaking to the new president in the next few days.
Yeah, and it would be Emma Little Pengelly's style in terms of how she's performed her function as Deputy First Minister to have some kind of meeting, some kind of conversation with Catherine Connolly in the future. obviously Catherine Connolly was backed by Sinn Féin in her election campaign, but then Emma Little Bengelli is sharing Stormont Castle with Michelle O'Neill herself. And at the same time as some unionists might not like some of the tenor of the recent Irish presidential election, there's the whole case of, a clean slate now that Catherine Connolly is starting off as the new Irish president and looking to build some sort of a relationship in future years until that's tested.
The timing here is quite interesting. The invitation was extended to the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister to attend the inauguration on Tuesday. The First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, responded very quickly to say she was going. There was then a time lag where we didn't know if Emma Little Bengelli would be attending or not. There was a lot of speculation. We just saw Naomi Long saying it would be good if she did attend. That was before we knew she wasn't going to attend. And then you have to ask, I suppose, and you can understand people asking, if the decision not to attend while there is a diary clash may also just be to do with the mood music at Stormont and the fact that maybe the DUP is a bit sore about some of the response to the Education Minister Paul Given's recent visit to Israel.
Yes, and I mean, we've seen a hardening up of DUP rhetoric just in the last few days with Paul Given, who, when he himself was made First Minister, talked about there being more that unites everyone at Stormont than divides them, but then he was at pains to say that he didn't see himself as a partner in government to Sinn Féin when he came under that attack, and he's going to face this no confidence vote in the coming days. So, yeah, there's a hardening. There's also, I think, the fact that the DUP knows that in the next Assembly election it can't rely on that argument that Peter Robinson, looking back on those pictures from 2011, would have trotted out on many occasions that you've got to keep us in place as First Minister, that argument's already gone, and so there might be more fluidity, and the TUV is, on 13 points in the last opinion poll, which is only 5 points behind the DUP. So that's the kind of political context to this.
Just finally, before we move on, while we have the DUP Deputy First Minister not going to Dublin, we do have the Sinn Féin First Minister Michelle O'Neill at the Cenotaph in Belfast today, laying a wreath for the second year in a row.
Yes, and whilst there might have been some opposition, I think there has been some opposition within Republican grassroots, it's pretty clear that the Sinn Féin leadership believes that the kind of moves that were made in the past by Martin McGuinness and that have been made more recently by Michelle O'Neill are paying off dividends in terms of showing that they've got a bit of moral high ground about some of these symbolic events. And so there was never any question really of her pulling out of that.
OK, we'll leave it there for now. Mark, thank you very much indeed. We'll talk to you again a little bit later in the programme. A rare chink of light in what was quite a gloomy week for Stormont was the announcement that the Health Minister has made a pay offer to the unions, including doctors, nurses and auxiliary staff. Mike Nesbitt hopes that the move to pay parity with workers elsewhere in the UK will rule out the possibility of industrial action before Christmas. I'm joined now by John Patrick Clayton from the Public Service Union Unison. Welcome to the programme. Do you think, first of all, that the possibility of industrial action, potentially strike action, has now been averted by this move?
Well, I think it is a positive move, Mark. I think there's some cautious optimism around it because we have to get back around the table with the department this week, work through the detail of what was announced earlier in the week in terms of the funding being made available to discharge the obligation around pay parity. That's the absolute minimum that our members expect. So it isn't quite yet an offer or a deal, I would say. There is some cautious optimism around it. I think we're much further forward. And I would hope as a consequence of that the health workforce is not going to be put in a position where we'd have to take any form of industrial action. But we have to work through some of the detail this week, particularly around, I would say, two issues. Firstly, the issue around how the lowest paid are going to have their position better advanced through this pay award and in subsequent years. That's a very significant issue for our membership in Unison. We have far too many people in the health service who are employed at minimum wage levels. We need to break that cycle in terms of that as an issue. And secondly, the further thing that the Minister referred to in his statement on Thursday, which relates to how we're going to break this cycle going forward, about the amount of time it takes to get funding in place to actually deal with issues of pay. Pay is not an unexpected issue. Pay awards have been due since April. We had a recommendation by the pay review body in May. We've had pay parity broken in Northern Ireland since August, whenever NHS workers in England got their pay uplift. And yet we're into November, and it's only now that we seem to be seeing a path open up around funding. So you cannot say for sure that the deal, whatever it finally looks like, is acceptable, and you will recommend it to your members for approval. But would you go so far as to say it's looking positive at this stage? I am much more hopeful than I have been in recent weeks, Mark, because, as I say, the path is opening up now in terms of the funding being in place that we've been asking about for many, many months, really since the Minister at the end of May said he was issuing a ministerial direction on the issue of funding. So we do have more clarity, it appears now, after Thursday. What we will do now is we'll get back into the room with the department, we'll work through that detail, we'll bring that back to our membership structures in unison, and we'll take it from there.
OK, I mean, do you think the minister's on your side in this throughout? Has he demonstrated his bona fides as far as you're concerned?
I think the minister's been quite genuine in his intent. I mean, he said as early as May that he wanted to honour commitments that have been made by him and by other health ministers, and indeed by the wider executive, to the issue of pay parity. And that, as I say, is the absolute minimum that we want to see being done. I think the difficulty we have is that the health budget began this year without a clearly defined sum in it for pay. We have wider pressures in terms of funding of public services in Northern Ireland that we're all familiar with. So it's how we get away from this cycle that we seem to have. It was a similar situation last year where it takes many, many months to have clarity around what money is available for pay and how those obligations on pay parity are actually going to be met.
Yeah, well, it is interesting that you should raise that point about the minister's intent. I just wonder how concerned you are about the way in which this deal seems to be being paid for, that Stormont has conjured the money up effectively from next year's budget.
Well, there does appear to be a situation across a number of departments where they are projected to overspend. So there's a wider pressure there in terms of public sector spending. So it is a concern, obviously, that they're having to look into next year in order to make right their obligations for this year. We're conscious that that does have an impact on budgets. But I suppose the problem, Mark, is that our people have a legitimate expectation, and a very reasonable expectation, that they will have pay parity with their colleagues. It's up to Stormont, and indeed it's up to the UK government, to make sure that the funding's in place to maintain those commitments.
Matthew O'Toole, the SDLP leader of the opposition at Stormont and chair of the Finance Committee, called the handling of these deals shambolic, chaotic and not good enough. Do you agree with him?
I think it's very disappointing that we seem to be having another year in which we're getting into the winter and we don't yet have a clear sense, or really now seem to be getting a clear sense in terms of what the funding is. The expectation is there right from the start of the financial year. We have previous commitments made around pay parity. So I would like us to be in a position in which we begin a financial year with a very clear sense of there's a budget there, that there's the minimum principles around things like pay parity that are well established. And then we're getting into the detail at a much earlier stage about how we address issues like low pay, for example, and other issues that are there for the health service workforce. I think that'll be a much better position within which to do pay, if you like. But it does go back to the pressures that are there on Stormont's budget, and we're conscious of those. But that's not the responsibility of our members. They're trying to work every day within the health service in order to deliver services for the public.
Do you think that things could be handled differently by the powers that be at Stormont? I mean, Andrew McCormick, who's a former top civil servant in the Department of Finance, said the decision to allow health to overspend its budget demonstrates how seriously the executive has failed to make realistic plans earlier in the cycle. Is your view that if there was, if we weren't always dealing with single-year budgets, and if there was better forward planning across the departments, you wouldn't have to go through this every time when you're looking for an annual pay increase for your members?
I think a clear multi-year budget could assist. I think there's things that Stormont could do that could be done by the Department of Health and by the Department of Finance and by other departments to make the process easier. We have, as you know, over this last 18 months to 2 years, had a situation in which the Barnett formula has had its uplift to 124%. But it does seem, from a trade union perspective, that isn't actually helping us to bridge the gap that's there between the needs of our public services, the needs around public sector pay, and what actually appears to be in budgets at the beginning of each financial year. OK, just a very quick word to explain for the benefit of people at home, because this is very, very complicated. We're talking effectively about health here. There, of course, is a situation where money is tight within education as well, but it doesn't directly impact on your members who had a settlement a while back. But, of course, the pay for teachers still is outstanding. It doesn't directly impact in terms of their pay, because our members in education who are in education support services have had a pay award earlier in this year, and obviously teachers aren't within our membership, so I can't speak knowledgeably about their situation, although I do think it speaks to the wider pressures that are there on funding. The announcements made earlier in the week by the Education Authority, I should say, we are very concerned about the impact they will have on the provision of education services, particularly the announcement in terms of the increase in the cost of school meals. Again, thinking of our members, many of them are low paid. They don't qualify for school meals under the current criterion. They're going to have to pay more, it appears, for their school meals. We think the EA needs to really urgently reconsider that decision. OK. Interesting to hear your thoughts, John. Patrick Clayton, thanks very much indeed for coming in to join us today. Well, that's primarily about the situation in the health and education sectors, but police officers' pay is also an issue, and it's one which the Justice Minister addressed on Friday.
I've had to make some really tough decisions, things that I would ideally love to do. And I have had to say, no, I can't do them because I don't have the resources. And I think we're now at a point, and we had a very candid exchange at Executive yesterday, where other ministers need to be willing to take similarly tough decisions, because otherwise they will plunge the entire Executive into debt and into crisis. Now, I think we've got to get over this initial challenge. And so, for example, last year we were able to sign off on the PSNI pay deal because I argued, again, the same case that I'm making this year, that I believe that to try to recruit officers at a time when we're not actually giving them their pay rise isn't fair and isn't going to be successful. It's going to increase attrition and make it harder for us to close the gap in numbers. That was successful last year. And as I say, I am confident as we sit here today that we will be in a position to make the pay award in year in full.
Well, let's have another quick word with Mark Davenport. I think it's fair to say public sector workers' pay might not be an issue that sets pulses racing compared to some of the other more totemic debates that we often see at Stormont, particularly last week. But in terms of the day-to-day running of this place, this sort of stuff is crucially important.
Absolutely crucially important. And of course, we've seen in the past things like the nurses' strikes that have put an awful lot of pressure on the political classes here. That came the last big one when we had Stormont down, and then it contributed towards Stormont getting put back up. Maintaining pay parity, you can see from the public sector workers the importance of that. But Stormont isn't very good at sort of managing its money, and it looks like it's really just kind of putting this off, pushing it to the next year and preferring a row with the Treasury rather than a row with the public sector unions, which might seem sensible at the moment, maybe will still seem sensible in the run-up to the next election, but creates some long-term problems in terms of the financial viability of this place.
Yeah, well, kicking the can down the road is fine and it resolves issues for now. But I mean, you've been around the block fairly long time. You've seen it all before. Are you worried about the consequences when we start eating into next year's budget to make pay settlements within this financial year?
Well, you start to see this kind of salami slicing effect whereby services start getting pared back, and we've seen that with school meals having to go up, or we see it with waiting lists getting ever longer. So that's the problem, if you like, that we've got of not managing the finances. But at the moment, the way the whole electoral system's set up, it seems to be that there's no kind of upside to being very fiscally rigorous, and instead we're just going to get back into that cycle of going to the Treasury with a begging bowl and asking for some more.
OK. Mark, thanks very much indeed. We'll speak to you again at the end of the programme. We're going to turn next to a contentious issue that will appear for discussion at the Assembly this coming week, not the motion of no confidence in Paul Givan, which is happening tomorrow, but a piece of work brought forward by the Alliance Party dealing with one aspect of the legacy of the Troubles. It's about memorials, one of the most challenging issues we face. The Alliance MLA Paula Bradshaw is hopeful we can plot a way forward, and she's here to explain how. Welcome to you. So you're aiming to take the toxicity out of memorials and monuments. How exactly are you hoping to do that?
Well, first of all, we in the Alliance Party absolutely respect people's right to remember their dead. There was a recommendation in the Commission for Flags, Identity, Culture and Tradition, a recommendation to carry out an audit of the memorials to see where they're located, what imagery, language and emblems are on those, with a view to maybe bringing forward a programme of work to work with those communities in which they're located, to move us on from the Troubles so that we can remove any reference to the glorification of paramilitary organisations, any romanticisation of the Troubles, because it was a horrendous time, and try to make them more sensitive, more respectful and dignified so that they can be in these shared spaces, in public spaces where we do not offend those people who suffered loss during the Troubles.
Why do you believe that a motion to be debated at the Assembly is the proper way to bring this issue forward?
Well, we're calling on several departments, primarily the First and Deputy First Minister and the Executive Office, to take this piece of work forward. We think that the time is right because this week we will see the introduction of the new Director of the Office of Identity, Culture and Expression. She'll come into post, Dr. Katie Radford. She was on the Flags Commission, and we think that this would be a really important piece of work for her and her colleagues to look at, in a way that she will go in and work with communities to build capacity, to reconfigure these memorials in a way that we feel that would contribute to a shared society. This office will cost the public purse £1 million per annum. And I think that this is a sort of sensitive, contentious issue that we could do in a very dignified way to actually move us forward as a society.
These memorials are often very local. They are erected sometimes on public ground, sometimes without planning permission by local organisations. They can be controversial. What authority would anyone or anybody have to ask communities on the ground to change what they say or how they represent what happened in the past, or to remove them entirely? Where would that authority be drawn from, in your view?
Well, first of all, you've pointed out that these are on public land, but what we're not trying to suggest is that we would inflict or enforce this on any community at all. But we have seen over the past few years a really successful programme of re-imaging of murals on walls, where we have moved away from men in balaclavas holding guns and moving more towards cultural expression.
Yeah, there's still plenty of contentious ones around.
And that work continues. And this is really about starting this now. We think that this is a really opportune moment. As I say, this new office is being established just this coming week. And I think that this is something that we would like to see going forward as a legacy almost from the Flags Commission, of something that all the members of that agreed to. So at the first stage, and then after that, then it would be about seeking the funding to work with those communities to deliver on the desensitisation of these memorials.
You can see that this is a controversial and a sensitive issue very easily by looking at your motion, which has been tabled, and then looking at the amendments that have been tabled by, as far as I understand it at this stage, the DUP and the Ulster Unionist Party. And immediately there's a whole conversation that develops about upholding the rule of law and order, about causing hurt, about innocent victims. That's a debate that the Alliance Party's got itself caught in recently. So I just wonder how hopeful you are that it would be possible to get the parties at Stormont to agree on very much.
Well, first of all, let me say that the vast majority of the memorials that are in place at the minute are dedicated to ex-combatants. Very few of them are actually about innocent civilians, people who were killed in the Troubles. So what we want to do is ensure that any memorials that are in place are delivered in a way that does not offend people and recognises the hurt that we have all felt and does not perpetuate the division we see across society. We need to move on from the memorials that we see. Some of them are very respectful, so that's why we need the audit. We need to identify those ones that would be helpful in terms of our transition, in terms of peace and reconciliation, that they were re-imaged, but in partnership with the community in which they are located.
So is it effectively about trying to perhaps design some kind of handbook of best practice that people and organisations on the ground would maybe voluntarily be asked to sign up to? OK, but which is fine if they do. The difficulty is going to be those organisations and individuals who refuse. Those memorials will continue to be offensive to some people and controversial.
Well, it's a difficult piece of work. And as I say, there's this new offices being set up, and they think that this is where those conversations...
You're putting an awful lot of pressure on the shoulders of Dr. Katie Radford. He hasn't even started the job yet.
Well, she has a number of colleagues on that, and I'd say there's going to be £1 million a year will be spent of public money on that office.
Have you talked to her about this, by the way? I mean, she's taking up office.
I've spoken to her about my own Flags Private Members Bill, which obviously is a very similar proposal that I'm taking forward. That will require legislation, but this piece of work isn't. This is more around policy. It's about funding allocation, and it's really about the communities working together so that we can actually improve our shared spaces. OK.
Let me ask you just finally about the presidential inauguration in Dublin on Tuesday and the decision of the Deputy First Minister, Emma Little-Pengelly, not to attend because she is attending other events in Belfast and in Windsor. First of all, were you surprised that the DUP is not going to be represented at that event, given that it was 14 years ago?
Well, I suppose we in the Alliance Party were hopeful that she would have accepted the invitation. Obviously, the 11th of November is a very important day for people here in Northern Ireland, in particular unionists. And I suppose the timing maybe of the invitation, I think it was only last week that it will have been received by the invitees, and possibly she did have those engagements in her diary for Windsor. And I sincerely hope that she meant what she said in her statement. And I would like to think that the departmental officials will be working within the Executive Office at pace with the President's Office in terms of setting up some really important engagements so that people here in Northern Ireland and across this island of Ireland can see that we can work together in the spirit of cooperation.
And to be fair to Emma Little-Pengelly, in that statement, as Mark Devonport has already said, she's very clear that she does want to have a conversation with the new president in the next few days. That's stated very clearly at the end of the statement that she issued at the end of the week. I said there the DUP won't be represented. In fact, we don't know. We know it won't be represented by the Deputy First Minister. Maybe it will be represented by someone else in the party. There would be plenty of individuals who could stand in for Ms Little-Pengelly. Do you think that should happen? Would you encourage the DUP to have somebody there?
I think that should happen. And I think that they will obviously have a couple of days, today and tomorrow to make that decision. But I hope that they do send somebody from the DUP. I think it would be the right thing to do. Yeah,
we've heard absolutely nothing about that. Have you heard any rumblings as to whether or not that's being discussed? No, not an idea, but you think the party should be there. Will the Alliance Party be represented?
Yes, our deputy leader will be there. Naomi Long will be at the remembrance service at the Assembly.
OK, so she has a diary clash very similar to Emma Little-Pengelly's clash, but the party will be represented.
Through our deputy leader.
OK, and we will look out for the debate about your motion in the Assembly later in the week. For now, Paula Bradshaw, thanks very much indeed for coming in to join us. Let's just have a final word with my guest of the day, Mark Devonport. What do you make of what Paula Bradshaw is talking about there, trying to deal with a very tricky issue, especially against a backdrop of high tension and toxicity at Stormont?
Well, she's certainly giving a sensitive role to Katie Radford in this new job. Drawing up an audit of memorials on either side, the paramilitary memorials towards Republican dead and towards the Loyalist dead, is one thing. Actually doing anything to touch those memorials will be potentially, causing a lot of friction in particular communities. So it will be something that would have to be handled with the utmost diplomacy and with the consent of the communities involved. Now, progress was indeed made in relation to re-imaging some of the paramilitary-themed murals, but not all of them. And I think the fact that memorials involve particular individuals, where particular families would have particular sensitivities about that, might make this one, in practice, a very hard nut to crack.
Yeah, the idea of a voluntary code of conduct incorporating best practice, I mean, it sounds good. It's quite hard to deliver, and people have to voluntarily sign up to it, and that's the difficulty, of course, because the issue is not the people who do sign up. As I said, the issue is the people who don't sign up.
Exactly, and you could well think that some of the memorials that might already be there, particularly large ones, those responsible for them would say, you're not touching our memorial, and then there's a knock-on effect for all the others.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that debate goes, as I say, in the chamber. Of course, this is shaping up to be a big week for the Assembly. And it has to be said, the mood music's not great.
No, and I mean, we can expect some more exchanges. We've already had quite a few angry exchanges over the whole business of the no confidence motion in relation to Paul Given. I just hope that when the history is written, that we've tried to do something to contribute towards a settlement in the Middle East rather than simply, had a lot of hot air there that doesn't change anything.
OK, well, we'll see. Mark, as ever, thank you very much indeed. That's all we've got time for today. I'll be back with The View on Thursday night at the usual time of 10:40 on BBC One and iPlayer. And, of course, we'll have another Red Lines podcast dropping on Wednesday afternoon. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.